For years, we've all watched the world try to understand Donald Trump using the traditional tools of political analysis. But what if we've been using the wrong tools for the job? The book Inside Leader's Mind makes a pretty radical claim that to really understand and maybe even predict his actions, we need to stop looking at politics and start looking at psychology. So this explainer is going to break down that exact framework. Okay, let's start with this quote because it's so telling. The author uses this to set the stage, because within this psychological framework, "I alone can fix it" isn't just some political slogan. No, it's a direct window into a core program, a glimpse into an operating system that's been running consistently for over 70 years. And this is exactly why the book argues we need a totally new approach. The author's point is that the sheer scale of everything has just overwhelmed normal analysis. I mean, think about it. Over 30,000 documented false claims, 2 impeachments, 91 felony charges, even a felony conviction. And yet, the usual tools of accountability just didn't work the way people expected. So, the book's conclusion? Moral outrage has proven to be strategically useless, which creates the need for a different lens, understanding purely for the sake of prediction. So, how does the book do this? Well, it frames its entire analysis as a user manual. A user manual doesn't judge a machine, right? It just tells you how it works, what happens when you push certain buttons. That's the same logic being applied here, treating the subject not as a biography, but as a complex system with predictable inputs and, well, predictable output. And this right here, this is the core idea, the mantra the author comes back to again and again. Explaining is not excusing. The goal isn't to justify any of the actions. It's about tracing the origins of a behavior. Because, according to this premise, if you understand the origins, you can see the trajectory. And if you can map the trajectory, you can predict where it's headed. So, what's the method here? The author calls it predictive psychology. Honestly, you can think of it like psychological archaeology, just digging through decades of documented behavior, everything from business deals to interviews to court records, to find those rigid, repeating patterns that have stayed consistent through every single stage of his life. To understand how any system works, the book argues, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to look at how its source code was written. For a person, that source code gets written in those early formative years of childhood, creating deep patterns that can last a lifetime. So the book points to a few really specific events it calls formative wounds. At just 2.5 years old, his mother had a near-fatal illness, which meant she was effectively gone for up to a year. His father, Fred Trump, demanded his sons be killers and wasn't afraid to use physical punishment. Then, at 13, he was sent away to military academy for being too aggressive. And as a young man, he watched his own father systematically tear down his older brother, Freddie, an experience the book argues became the central lesson of his life. You're either a killer or you get killed. So here's the crucial point. That source code created an operating system with these core, unchangeable algorithms. And these aren't just tendencies or habits. The book describes them as rigid programs that run automatically in response to certain triggers, and they shape every single decision and interaction. Okay, so let's look at the first core program the book identifies. It's called the dominance imperative. This is the worldview that comes directly from his father. Every single interaction is a zero-sum battle. There are only 2 possible outcomes. You dominate or you get dominated. You're a killer or you're a loser. There's absolutely no middle ground. And once you see this algorithm, you start to see it everywhere. Interrupting someone isn't just rude, it's a tool to assert control. Calling opponents nicknames isn't childish, it's a tactic to define and diminish them. And the opposite is just as true. Apologizing is seen as a fatal sign of weakness. De-escalating a conflict? That feels like surrender. To this operating system, submission is basically a form of psychological death. And that leads us right into the second core program, the vengeance algorithm. So whenever that dominance imperative gets challenged by a criticism, a perceived slight, or disloyalty, this second program kicks right in. It demands retaliation. And according to the book, it has 2 key features. The response has to be way out of proportion, and there's absolutely no statute of limitations. And the thing is, the book points out this isn't some hidden impulse that reporters had to dig up. Nope, it's an advertised feature. This quote is from one of his own books. The drive for getting even isn't just a character trait. It's a core part of his public brand, and, as he declared in a 2023 speech, a central campaign promise. I am your retribution. Okay, so we've looked at the source code, the operating system, the core algorithms. What's the point of all this? Well, it all leads to the book's ultimate purpose, using this psychological map to make concrete, specific predictions about what he'll do next. This brings us to a really crucial point. The analysis argues that these traits aren't bugs that can be fixed with new advisors or the pressures of a big job. They are load-bearing walls. So expecting him to suddenly develop empathy or admit he was wrong or back down from a fight, it would be like expecting a building to stay standing after you've removed its foundation. The book's position is that it is structurally impossible. So this framework leads to one of the book's biggest predictions, and it's rooted in that vengeance algorithm and dominance imperative. The plan, it argues, is to bring back an executive order called Schedule F. This would basically reclassify tens of thousands of career government professionals, making them easy to fire. They would then be removed and replaced by pre-vetted loyalists, all to ensure the entire machine of government serves the leader's will, not the law or the Constitution. So after mapping all this out, the source code, the operating system, what does this user manual actually tell us about what might happen next? The book anchors its conclusion in hard data, and this number, 30,573, that's the number of false or misleading claims cataloged by the Washington Post during his presidency. The author uses this not just to point out dishonesty, but to make a much bigger point, that a system of communication so disconnected from reality just can't be analyzed by normal methods, which circles right back to why we need this psychological model in the first place. So, in the end, what is all this for? The author is clear. This entire analysis is a map. It's not meant to tell you which way to turn or what destination to choose. Its only purpose is to describe the terrain as accurately as it can so that whatever comes next, we're not surprised. And it leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. By giving us a predictive map of these psychological patterns, the book kind of flips the script. It argues that if the patterns are this predictable, the main question isn't what one person will do anymore. The real question is, how will everyone else respond?